When it comes to First Take ESPN, one of my least favorite commentators they have is JJ Redick. As when it comes to any debate, it is a foregone conclusion this guy is going to side with the player and the current NBA superstar. And recently on First Take, it was no different when discussing Kevin Durant as a leader and lack of skills in that department.
The question is, does he get the credit he deserves? I think as a basketball player, Stephen, I think you're right. I think he does get the credit he deserves, but there's always a but attached to it because of the decision. I talked about this in 2016, right after he chose to go to the Warriors, and I was a fan of that move. And I was on the Clippers and had to go compete against the Warriors. I knew our championship window was closed the second he signed that contract, but I was still a fan of the move because I believe players, they get drafted, serve their rookie contract, play the 5 years. He gave 9 years, 9 great years to Oklahoma City. He had the right to pursue whatever was going to make him happy at the time, just like he had the right after the Warriors run to pursue whatever was going to make him happy at the time. We are athletes. We have a finite amount of time to enjoy this ride. I had no problem with it. I have no problem, actually, with any decision he's made.
So that right there was a mouthful. But Redick's point in the beginning, just the baseline of his point, it is correct. As Kevin Durant being a free agent, he can go to every team he wants to make the decision that most benefits him. But here's the thing. When KD makes that decision, signs a deal with the devil, fans, media members have the right to criticize him for doing so. And like we've said numerous times on this channel, KD going to Golden State in the middle of his prime is the weakest move ever for a superstar player. And looking at Redick as a competitor, I just call BS on this that when KD went to the Warriors, he was somehow happy and overjoyed the Clippers' window to win was officially over. I do not believe that at all.
He was the best player on the floor. There's a reason he won those finals MVPs. 35, 8 and 5 and 17, 56%, 47% from 3, 29, 11 and 8 assists in 18, 53%, 41%. He was the best player. To me, he doesn't get the credit he deserves as a defensive player. These last few seasons, he's been phenomenal on that end.
Now, stopping it right there, so many egregious points and just utter nonsense. I'm not even going to touch on the defensive thing, I can do a whole video on that later. But looking at KD's final stats, 2017 and 2018, looking at the raw numbers, they are fantastic. And I tip my hat to Kevin Durant for winning MVP of both those series. But here's the thing, adding some context, digging a little bit deeper than the stats. Cleveland's defensive game plan wasn't to stop KD. The guy they were trying to stop was Steph Curry. Tyler was on record saying Steph, in that series and possibly the NBA, was the most dangerous player alive. And in both those finals, they would blitz Steph Curry despite Klay Thompson being on the floor and even KD being on the floor. That's how dangerous Steph Curry was. What that proves in a nutshell that Steph Curry, in both those finals, was the MVP and the leader of Golden State. And yes, KD got his numbers, played fantastic. But Steph was the engine for Golden State, and KD was extra ammo on the side. And looking at some pretty damning advanced stats, when it came to the 2017 playoffs, Steph versus KD, their on-off offensive numbers, they're pretty shocking. Golden State with Steph was a plus 18.5. With Steph off the court, minus 2.1. A 20-point difference. Look at Durant, with him on the court, plus 15.5. Very impressive. Now, KD off the court Golden State still was a plus 9.5. In terms of overall offensive value, Steph in that series was much more valuable than Kevin Durant.
He doesn't get the credit he deserves because of his decision-making, which everyone wants to critique his decision-making. I don't necessarily think that's fair. I don't. And you can have qualms here about his decision to team up with Kyrie in Brooklyn. Here's the reality. They were a James Harden injury, a Kyrie injury, and a toenail away from probably winning the 21 NBA Finals. That's the reality.
Now, stopping right there, Redick, off the bat, just slants a narrative in his favor to build his own narrative. As in talking about so-called decision-making, he puts that in quotations. And what he's trying to imply is that KD's decision-making, doesn't really matter. Yes, in Brooklyn, had Kyrie failed, had Harden failed, had Book in Phoenix, CP3 in Phoenix, failed there too. But it doesn't really matter with the decision making. What I would ask JJ is, where's the accountability for Kevin Durant, the leader, and his own decisions? You can't have it both ways. In one clip, Redick is saying players need to do what, quote, makes them happy. But in the next breath, when they do that and fail, you as the fan, the media, are not to criticize them for then failing, having done what, quote, made them happy. The bottom line with Redick, it is pretty simple, and it's been true for a long time. This guy, day in, day out, refuses to critique any good NBA player, and especially a superstar. And when it comes to Kevin Durant, he wouldn't dare say a bad word about him. Because if he did, then KD possibly wouldn't come on his podcast, other players wouldn't do it. Redick's whole business is built on his podcast getting players. And I think proof of Redick going soft on players was most evident in this Doc Rivers incident. As when it came to Doc, an active coach, a guy who coached Redick, this guy had no problem attacking Doc, his character, leadership, and coaching style. Had no problem doing that. So I ask you guys, if Redick attacks Doc Rivers, a coach he actually played for, and he was still active, where's that energy for Kevin Durant? And one thing I do want to address really quickly, saying that Brooklyn with Kevin Durant was somehow close to a championship, this close to a title, is simply nonsense. Since when is Game 7 of the East semifinals considered close to a championship and being champions? It's not. And look, give me the Kyrie excuse, the Harden excuse, give me all the excuses you want. Here's the bottom line. When KD went to Brooklyn, he attached his wagon to Kyrie Irving. And Kyrie, pre-Brooklyn, was known to be injury-prone and kind of a wacky, quirky teammate. All of Brooklyn's problems, Phoenix's problems, even OKC's problems stem from one thing: Kevin Durant being a poor leader.
On the leadership front, not everybody leads the same way. Have you been in a locker room with Kevin Durant? Here's what I know about Kevin Durant. I know that Kevin Durant leads by example. I know the way he approaches his craft. This is a guy that lives, breathes, eats, sleeps basketball. That's a form of leadership.
So, stopping it right there, Redick tries to reframe the argument of Kevin Durant, him being a hard worker or a great player, as some form of leadership. And yes, he is right, leading by example is a form of leadership. But the point is, leading by example only takes you so far. And some of the innate qualities Tim Duncan had, Larry Bird had, guys like Jordan, Russell, Magic, qualities those guys had, it was more than lead by example. Even Tim Duncan, who was a quiet dude by all accounts, was an alpha dog who would get in you if you were messing up. And all those guys I named, when they were in tough moments back against the wall, they didn't give up, run to a rival, or demand a trade for choices they made. Yes, Kevin Durant is a leader. Is he a good one? Maybe compared to the average leader, but compared to the top tier guys, doesn't measure up.
Now I want to address Stephen A's point. Since when is it players' jobs to educate people on basketball? When did that become a thing? When did that become a thing? Isn't that our job? Isn't that our job?
I'll answer.
I view that as my job. That's my job to educate people on basketball.
I'm letting you speak, and then I'll answer.
It's our job, Stephen A., to educate people on basketball. It's our job. And here's the reality. This is the ecosystem we live in. I can do a video on my podcast. Where I break down the last 9 games the Pelicans have used Zion Williamson as the primary ball handler and what type of actions that has led to. I looked it up this morning. 54,000 views on YouTube. But I want to call out a coach yesterday. Oh, that gets tens of millions of engagements. That's the ecosystem we live in. So do fans actually want to be educated or not? Do they?
Now, that right there I found kind of embarrassing for a couple of reasons. First off, Redick talks about breaking down games, film on his YouTube channel. Now here's the thing. If you actually love basketball, love doing that, the views you get, you really wouldn't care about. But when it comes to views, getting clicks, just making money in general, breaking news, JJ Redick, personal disputes, on-court fights, drama in the locker room, that sells more than breaking down pick and roll of the New Orleans Pelicans. And I find it just so ironic. Redick is complaining about narratives being in sports. Look where you are. You're at First Take, the birthplace of narratives. NFL, college football, basketball, everything. First Take is built and driven by narratives. And look, that's not really a bad thing because sports most times are driven by narratives and players. I mean, basketball in the 80s was quite literally saved by two superstars and the narrative surrounding them. Those guys being Magic and Bird.
Just because you didn't play and you didn't play on that level doesn't mean you don't
Stephen
know.
A, don't jump on that bridge. Don't jump on that bridge.
Oh, you know
I was not bringing it up. You don't need to tell me your track record. I have told you a million times.
I'm not talking about my track record.
Show. I know you are a legend. You are a legendary journalist. Mike Wilbon is a legendary journalist. That's not what I'm talking. I'm not talking about being in the locker room after a game.
Well, what are you talking about then?
This is
you the one that brought it up. I'm asking you what you're talking about.
The day-to-day work that is put in when the cameras are off. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the sanctity of a locker room. But it doesn't matter. The sanctity of a practice. We don't have privilege to see inside that. We don't.
Now, if you're following along pretty closely, Redick right here said Stephen A. Smith, legendary sports journalist, he's not attacking them about their critiques of Kevin Durant. Which makes you wonder, who is he critiquing? Not the media, not Stephen A. Smith, the talking heads. He's critiquing the average fan. And when talking about having access to locker rooms, interviewing players, the average fan does not have that. But here's the thing. It doesn't take some basketball genius to recognize bad play, bad offensive sets, and just plain old bad defense. I mean, Paul George in the 2020 playoffs, I can tell you, not having played in the NBA, this dude choked, was a brick, and mentally checked out. And I think watching this segment in its entirety, there's a major contradiction by Redick made in this clip. As you guys just heard, he said, we don't have the privilege to be in the locker room to the day-to-day grind from guys like Kevin Durant. Of course, that is true. Now, where's the contradiction? Redick wasn't a teammate, wasn't an insider, didn't have access, and still defended Kevin Durant as a leader. That is the exact same thing the fans are doing, but in the opposite direction. Which once again hammers the point home. Redick will not critique current NBA players.
We do get to measure results then, because we don't know. And the fact that, and then it is another thing, JJ Redick, most times folks ain't honest about it. They'll come at honesty later. But you're not going to give insight into the particulars that go on inside of a locker room. So somebody covering the team may not know this week. They might know next week. They might know the week after. And you know what you'll do then? Not you specifically, but you know what folks would do then? You're just looking for trouble. You're looking for the negativity. How much truth is there to that? You've seen guys' plausible deniabilities. Mad Dog, how many times in your career have you seen one player after another, deny? Critique, insult, and then they retire and admit that the person was telling the truth all the damn long.
When Stephen A. Smith is on, he is really on. And right here was some all-time great cooking. As in debating Redick, he said flat out, some players, teammates, even coaches aren't always honest. 1000% true. If you're a teammate of a player, say just former teammate 2-3 years ago, you're still in the NBA, you're a role player. You're not going to trash Kevin Durant openly to the media. You're just not going to do that as an NBA player who's actively playing.
To sit up there and look at Kevin Durant, recognize him as being an absolutely phenomenal future Hall of Famer, first ballot without question, two-time champion, two-time NBA Finals MVPs, one of the greatest players in the history of this game, and you can talk about different types of leadership, but we would argue that his type of leadership didn't necessarily lead to more success that he could have had. Does he owe it to anybody? No. But when you talk about the narrative, when you talk about how somebody is depicted, when you're talking about him in comparison to other bona fide leaders and what have you, Kevin Durant said it himself on a bottom ticker. You know what? In terms of him, I want people to call me a leader. It's not that I don't feel like I want people to call me a leader, but I also don't want them to say that I'm not one either. Well, which one is it?
Once again, Stephen A. major props, because right there, he morphed into a prime Mike Tyson and Redick was Michael Spinks. Absolutely stunning and great stuff. And hopefully Redick in those 40 seconds kind of got humbled from his earlier points, as the overall vibe I got early on was a very elitist attitude. I'm an NBA player, I'm above you. The common fan is beneath me. That's the vibe I got. And seeing lines like, is it our job to educate fans? Stuff like that, it pisses me off. And when it comes to Redick being quote-unquote educated, this is the same guy who craps on eras like the 90s and the 80s and disrespects guys like Bob Cousy. When it comes to education, Redick needs to take a course in NBA history, as looking at a lot of his takes regarding past eras, they're completely off base. And to kind of go full circle, hammer my point home yet again, when it comes to past eras, past legends, Redick has no hesitation to critique them and take a crap on them. So that right there is the end of the video. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.